We are very, very excited to be with you here today and share our expertise and our ideas and our thinking on the very interesting topic of psychological safety in the workplace. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ray Campari. I'll be the moderator for our session today. I'm part of the business development team here at Merit Solutions and Services based in Philadelphia. We are a training and consulting and coaching company based here in Philly, as I said. We have customers not only throughout the US and around the world, and our research really and our expertise and our success is focused on the 3 Ps of what we call organizational success. And they are developing your people, improving your process, and ultimately improving their collective performance. Part of our ongoing session education series and training calendar here at Merit, we provide webinars and training programs on a regular basis. We wanted to call your attention today on our next event, which will be happening on May the 7th in 2020. That'll be on the topic of building team effectiveness. So with that, I'm very, very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Ms. Gail Cooperman. Gail is a Vice President of Marketing here at Merit Solutions and Services based in Philadelphia, and she is an experienced communications and leadership development professional. So today we're very pleased that Gail can join us, and she can share with us her knowledge, her war stories, best practices on the topic of psychological safety in the workplace. But most importantly, we're hoping that our goal is to help you understand how this topic can apply to you, to your organization, and to your employees. So with that, I turn this over to Gail Cooperman.
Thank you, Ray. That was a great introduction. With that, I would like to tell you what to expect. Here's a quick overview of our agenda. We're going to start out by talking about what is psychological safety, what happens when it doesn't exist in an organization, how it positively impacts the workforce, and then some, your whole organization. How do we encourage it? Because it's one thing to recognize that you have a problem with it. How do we build it? We will go over that. And of course, we're going to have Q&A, and we're going to have our exit survey. We do want to start with our first poll. And our first poll is to help us understand where you are on this topic. Is your organization psychologically safe now? Let me show you the results. So 23% of you aren't sure what it really means, which is probably why you're here. 14% of you think you don't have it, which is another good reason to be here. And 41% of you think it may exist in some parts of your organization. So that's great, because then you have something comparative when you talk to senior management, where you can say, look how this team interacts. We can aim to be more like that. And of course, the last 23% already have pretty good psychological safety. So that's terrific. And now I want to tell you how we got so involved in psychological safety. We have a client who came to us about 2 years ago, and he said, we have a problem. We seem to have enormous amounts of faulty products being shipped out of our factory, and they're being shipped all over the world, and we don't understand why. We then went ahead and hired a consultant who did some research and found out that we have a lack of psychological safety, that we have people who are too afraid to speak up and let people know that this was, that there were problems there. So what were we going to do? Our task was to come in and really help them change this culture. And we did. Our goal was to make sure that every employee knew that senior management was behind psychological safety, behind wanting everyone to open up and to speak freely. I will say this did not change overnight. So we were having 4 to 8, actually 12 meetings a week in the beginning, all 1-hour meetings remotely. And over time, what happened is that people started to embrace the concept that management wanted them to speak up if there was an issue. And they did, in fact, start to come together more, and the morale changed and productivity changed, and the amount of errors went down because if somebody suspected a problem, they spoke up. I'm happy to say there's been a great improvement, and they're doing well. In the late 1990s, a professor, a research scientist named Amy Edmondson from Harvard was studying medical mistakes, and she was on a mission to really get to the bottom of what was going on in these hospitals. And her theory was that The teams that communicated with each other, that got along better, that bonded the most, were the ones having the fewest mistakes. Her theory was that the teams that didn't communicate well, in fact, were the ones that were having problems. It sounds logical, right? But as it turns out, it was just the opposite. What she found out was that the most cohesive teams reported the most mistakes. Now, there's a key differential. They reported the most mistakes because they had psychological safety, which term developed as a result of this. And what she realized was that these were the people who were able to identify a problem, address it, and resolve it. Why is psychological safety so important? When you have psychological safety, you are creating a workplace that enables three important traits. They are learning, innovation, and growth. These are all things that are really important to companies being competitive in today's world. So the point is, how are we going to make this happen? Well, first I'm going to start with, how does it work? How do you know? So when people feel psychologically safe, they feel safe taking interpersonal risks. By that I mean they're comfortable asking for help. You don't want an organization where people are afraid to speak up and say, I think I did something wrong. I think there's a better way of doing something. I'd like to suggest something. I want to point out a mistake. I want to seek a better way to do a function. This is key. If they're willing to take interpersonal risks, you're going to get a lot further. These are the teams that work together more effectively. These teams work both interdependently and independently, and they can communicate with little or no boundaries. These are the people who maybe look like they don't even finish their sentence because each other understands them so well. Now, as you probably know, having psychological safety doesn't happen overnight. It's built on relationships that are built on trust. So we really have to work hard at building trust, and this comes from openness and admitting our own mistakes. The other thing that's really great about having psychological safety is that it enables people to have a sense of autonomy. You want people to feel they can advance, they can move forward, they can take a little bit of risk without having to get approval every step of the way. But most important, these are the people that recognize that their input is highly valued. And that's where you come in, by letting them know constantly that you value their input, not only for their job and their activities, but maybe on some important decision making. What skills do they need? What skills do they have? What skills do they need to develop better? How's their workload? Is it distributed well? Do they need to change anything? Do they think rewards and recognition need to happen at a greater level? These are all things you can ask them that don't necessarily cost you anything other than some time, but it will pay off. So here's our second poll. This poll is on our interest in finding out what you would think is the most important benefit of having psychological safety in your organization. So you're not as worried overall about decreasing customer impacting errors. You do want to improve communications. You want to explore more innovative concepts, and you do want to improve morale and productivity. Well, it all comes together. Having a highly psychologically safe environment will definitely help all of these. It gets to a point where people say, this is great. We want to have psychological safety, but we also don't want people to become so comfortable that they don't think that they have to be accountable. Well, I'm here to tell you it is not a trade-off. And this is what it looks like, okay? So let's say you're looking at this plotted on a graph, right? We have low to high psychological safety on the left, and across the bottom we have low to high motivation and accountability. We clearly want both, because what happens if we have low psychological safety and low motivation? We're going to have apathy. Obviously, you don't want that. Like we talked about before, you want the morale, you want communication, you want productivity. Now, if you have high psychological safety, but low motivation and accountability, people may get too comfortable. We don't want that either. We really want people to still perform, right? Now, let's look at it this way. If we have high accountability and motivation, but low psychological safety, we have a situation similar to what we had in our manufacturing client. People were anxious, they were scared, they were actually frightened, but they were not performing well. And that's why when we look at a blend, having high motivation and high psychological safety, that's where we come up with our high performing groups, our high performing individuals, and our high performing teams. So your goal is to try to reach a blend of both of these. And there's a lot of research that does substantiate this. Now, for a lot of you that are in leadership, you may have had some training on the leadership triad. And I want to bring this up because none of this is a pure, clean formula. There's always this triad. There's the leader, the follower, and the situation. And the amount of psychological safety and the amount of motivation does tend to change between the leader and follower depending on the situation. So I just want you to think about what role does the situation play. If you're looking at a problem that occurred and people did not speak up, or you're looking at a situation where you want to increase communications and morale, think about what environment is it that will help this happen better. I have learned through researching this and studying up on this that it is actually our instinct to want to make a good impression. And because of that, workers typically are afraid to speak up and voice a complaint or show a problem because they don't want to look ignorant or incompetent or intrusive. They don't want to look negative and they don't want to look disloyal. That's a big concern. People don't want to look like they're disloyal when in fact, they're actually being more loyal and more of a team player if they're speaking up because they're trying to help reach your ultimate objectives. But ultimately, they're afraid because they don't want to risk losing their jobs, right? How do you know whether or not the people around you feel safe? Well, for one thing, you'll notice people are really not asking questions. Even when it's pretty obvious that things could be better, that things could work differently, they don't question anything. They also don't admit mistakes. And if you confront them in a non confronting way, which we'll talk about, if you ask them, do you know what happened? Did you have anything to do with this? Is there anything we could do better? They won't admit it. They also don't offer new ideas or suggest other ways of looking for alternatives. They don't disparage the current state, even when it's really obvious. Ultimately, they're kind of playing along. Phrases that we've heard in the past is they're drinking the Kool-Aid. They don't want to tell the emperor he's not wearing new clothes. With that, I'm going to move on to what do we do? There are a lot of things, and I will say they take work. What we have to do is frame it as a learning opportunity, not as a threatening problem. What you want to do is really and truly reinforce the importance of having everyone on the team contribute to coming up with a solution. You want to really involve everybody and make it a learning opportunity. It really helps a lot when leaders acknowledge their own mistakes. The more you're open about admitting your own failures, your own shortcomings or mistakes, the more comfortable other people are. One way you might be able to do that is say something like, I may be missing some information and I need to know. I need to hear from all of you. And finally, is to model curiosity. When you show how important it is to ask questions all the time, even when it's not related to a problem or a concern, you're teaching people that being curious is a good thing. That's what really opens the door to new events, new findings, new solutions. When you observe psychological safety, you have a leader and a follower. Again, the situation, but the leader and the follower really are involved in developing goals and objectives. When you do this together, you're again building that psychological safety. You want to also talk to your team about workplace improvements. What can they do? What would they like to see done? It may not all be feasible, but let's have goals. Let's move on. What about empowerment levels? That the more we empower people, the more action they can take with confidence. And again, this comes from psychological safety. You'll notice when somebody has a low comfort level, they feel like they have to inform you about everything. And maybe there's some things you don't really need to know that you wish they trusted their knowledge and their instinct and the authority you're giving them to just move on. But they feel they have to inform you because they're not feeling safe. Now, you can tell when they're safer when they inform you, but then take action. The next step is when they take the action and then inform you that they took it. So here, they're not waiting, they're not informing you and then acting, they're actually taking action and then informing you. That's good. Ultimately, they can just take the action and they don't really have to inform you, not in a timely manner, unless this is something that's a precedent. But the point is that they're comfortable enough they can just get things done. In summary, If you have little or no psychological safety, that's when you have cover-ups. That's when we have lack of insight. Little psychological safety is stifling innovation because people are afraid to think outside the box. They're afraid of thinking and growing and coming up with ideas that could be shut down. However, when we have lots of psychological safety, we're encouraging people to explore issues, problems, and resolving them. Also, it leads exploration to different options. So you may not even think we need another option, but sometimes it's really best to keep pursuing them. And finally, recognize, and I think that's probably why so many of you are on here today, is that when you have psychological safety, it really impacts not only the current state of your organization, but the future state. And it will help assure that you're going to sustain your business and keep growing because people are going to have the right attitude, the right morale, the right sense of comfort, and yet be motivated to keep growing. One more time, to encourage psychological safety, frame the situation as a learning opportunity to everyone, not just a threatening problem. Leaders, please acknowledge your own shortcomings, ask a lot of questions, demonstrate that you have shortcomings too. Demonstrate how curious you are and how that's so helpful to everyone.
Well, very good, Gail. Thank you very, very much. Good information shared there. Thank you. It seems like it's applicable to many organizations, regardless of size or industry. Gail, some questions back to you from our attendees today. This question comes from TJ. TJ asks, how can I connect psychological safety and performance reviews in my organization?
Good question. You know, that brings up a really good point. We have a lot of data that we have studied on psychological safety and actually performance reviews. And one of the things you may be aware of is that people hate annual reviews. I read a percentage, it was like 79% of people really, really dislike having a review once a year because it creates fear. What don't I know? What kind of feedback am I going to get? The way to really connect psychological safety with performance reviews is to get rid of the annual one and meet regularly. Maybe have a quarterly conversation. Make sure people know their objectives and how they're doing along the way.
Another question from our attendees today. This one comes from Deborah, who's in Tennessee. And her question is, who's curious, what industry was that for the Virginia client? And what was your biggest takeaway from that program?
Well, the industry is automotive parts. My biggest takeaway was that this doesn't happen overnight. It took a while to really get the management team to even open up, let alone the people that reported to them. I'd say it took a good 3 months of every single week getting together for an hour until I saw people really opening up more and feeling comfortable. And then it probably took another 3 months until they really had a whole team of people reporting to them who were opening up more and feeling more safe reporting issues and concerns.
So more questions keep coming in. So this one is from Amir in North Carolina. Amir says, where do I begin to make changes regarding psychological safety in my organization? Do I begin at the leadership level? Is it process? Is it managers? Is it individual contributors? Where do I begin? Where do I stick my foot in?
One thing that we know for sure is that leadership has to be part of this process. So I'd say the first thing you want to do is show them the benefits of it.
Several questions here relating to kind of the same topic, and I'll share this one with Carol. Carol's in California. Carol says, what specific organizational metric can we look at to measure improvements in psychological safety? Is it the typical HR metrics of turnover or morale, or is it more on the process side of productivity or innovation or engagement?
I could say yes to all of the above. I think one of the things that you might find that initially may not look like a good metric is that more mistakes or concerns may be reported. But again, reported is the key because you really want people to open up and share these issues so that they can make improvements. So you may want to keep track of issues acknowledged and brought up because it is a good sign, even though they may be negative issues, but that's the only way they're going to really get resolved.
Curtis in Texas asked, how would I bring this topic to my leadership's attention? And I think you just talked about it.
I think if somebody were to go to their leadership team and say, I think we have a problem with psychological safety and we need to move forward and address it, it would obviously help to talk about the reason they're going there in the first place. Some people feel it exists in some areas of business and not others. So when you have something like that, you can actually compare and contrast the way that different areas communicate. So that would be a helpful sign for starters, is to note that, you know, this group over here seems to communicate better and they are able to resolve issues. We're having some problems. Can you help us? Can you bring in some people to help? You know, a lot of times an outside facilitator can help those things better than somebody inside. I think the most important thing is to make sure the senior leadership team understands the value and is committed to wanting to achieve psychological safety. And if not, that's going to be a stopping point or the obstacle that you have to overcome.
I want to thank Gail tremendously for your insight and your wisdom and conversation today. If you have found today's conversation valuable, you would like more information, I encourage and welcome you to reach out to Gail or myself or anyone here at Merit Solutions and Services in Philadelphia for a conversation around this topic and about how to improve your organization and to improve the ultimate performance.